Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, October 22nd, 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com and the Washington Post. And back off the disabled list is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. All right, guys, let's start with some relatively breaking news. Late yesterday, it was announced by the UFC that Joseph Duffy is out of Saturday's UFC Fight Night Dublin show. Apparently, according to his coach, Faraz Zahabi, last day of sparring, which was just this past Saturday night, he suffered a concussion. And UFC, being the regulators, the athletic commission for this event, took him to a doctor, ran him through some tests, ruled him out of the fight. Dustin Poirier without an opponent now, so that means that this show on Saturday, which is happening in front of a sold-out crowd, lost its main event and co-main event, and both of those fights were essentially not replaced. So now Paddy Holohan versus Louis Smolka is the new main event on Saturday. I want to start first with this idea that Duffy was training Saturday night, last day of sparring, and suffers a concussion 7 days before the fight. This is not new for TriStar. They do this all the time, and they're a very reputable team. Far be it for us to really question their ways, but when you hear this, what do you think?
It sucks. I mean, it's bad. I mean, look, if you look at Faraz Zahabi's, this is all about Faraz Zahabi's tenure and his track record and the guys up there. How many times has this happened before with doing the exact same things with other elite fighters? Never. At least not 1 week out. It's just unusual. It's just bad timing. It really sucks. It's unfortunate. It's a byproduct of the realities of mixed martial arts training. It's the reality of the frailty of the human condition. And there's really these like deeply hot, scorching lava takes about what's this guy doing sparring so far out and everything. It's like training 1 week out, a Saturday before Saturday, that being his last day of sparring. Some gyms might do it slightly different, but that's not unusual. You end it there, and then the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, it's media, it's weight cutting, it's just breaking a sweat. There's not some kind of grand plan here. It just is bad luck.
Yeah, and particularly for all those people who bought those tickets in Dublin, and you probably the greatest day of your life was covering that Dublin
I don't know
card.
about that.
Okay.
But hey, those people got to experience a great show. This is kind of their...
This is karma? This is karma for having a good time.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well,
That'll
it
learn
was
you.
going to be a test anyway because that last time, all the excitement, Conor McGregor. I don't know that Joseph Duffy versus Dustin Poirier was going to generate the kind of interest anyway. But we knew that was such a rabid crowd that it was going to be exciting nonetheless. Now we're not even at the second tier; we're at the third tier, and let's see what happens on Saturday in front of that crowd.
It's a barely recognizable UFC product.
Yeah.
That
Okay,
was
but
the thing for
we
me.
do have to give them the pass because 2 fights fell.
I understand.
out on
I'm just
short
saying,
notice.
that's how weird the situation is.
Absolutely.
Someone was asking me. Sorry to interrupt, Chuck. Someone was asking me, how do you grade this card? I don't know if you even can.
Yeah.
It's not a UFC. It's a UFC product in name only.
And I will quickly add that I actually think this was the perfect encore because you always have to build new talent, and you have the guy who last beat Conor, who's the complete antithesis of Conor McGregor. I mean, what he does, and I criticized him for not speaking up at the Go Big press conference. I actually, in hindsight, think it was perfect. If he could have come out and dismantled Dustin Poirier, he really would have set up a potential rematch down the line very well. And now you have these other, there are people who like Conor, but they also are some who are starting to feel like he's a little too brash. This guy cannot be anything like him. So it's so unfortunate because this was perfect for Joseph Duffy.
And encore is exactly right. That's how it seemed to me the whole time that they were doing this. You got the guy. It was really built around Joseph Duffy, really, because they were like, well, now we're going to make this guy because we have a looming, conflict with him and Conor McGregor. He's Irish. Everybody's going to turn out. We saw fast. They sold out that arena based on his name. So it felt the whole time like an encore show, basically, for Ireland getting the next show. So for him to fall out, that was really the worst thing that could possibly happen. Everybody was talking about like, well, what about just throwing somebody against Dustin? Dustin Poirier was just really the piece that they stuck in there to go against the Irishman. That's what the whole thing was about. It would have made no sense. It makes no sense for Dustin Poirier to fight somebody on short notice, being where he's at. He's still, in his new weight class, and just being where he's at and what he can do at a young age. there's no point for him to do that. And there would be no point really for him to do that for the Irish fans, really, because I feel like it was more of a showcase for their guy against a legit, guy who has some history going against Conor McGregor and all that. So it's a really bad, like you said, it sucks. It's a bad situation for them. It feels like the one piece of the puzzle you just couldn't pull out of that, just pulled out. When they lost the Rothwell fight, it sort of felt like, well, that sucks because they generally on these Fight Pass, they have a couple of good ones, and then they have a bunch of either middling guys or like regional guys or newcomers and stuff, all stuffed in the Fight Pass middle, Unfortunately, now we're at the point where all those guys are now going to get the spotlight. Maybe it'll be a fun card, but it's definitely taken a bad turn here.
Can we talk about something he brought up that has been driving me
I have a feeling I know
this
it
morning?
is.
People are like, well, why didn't Poirier take the Norman Park fight? Are you out of your mind? What incentive could he possibly have to take that fight? Norman Park is a very good fighter, okay? Very good. But he's not necessarily ranked or considered to be in a similar position to Dustin Poirier. So if you beat him, which is no easy task because he can fight, right? You gain nothing. I mean, you get your win bonus. Okay, great. Which if you need it, I suppose you have to do it. But that seems like a very dire position. If you lose, oh my God, you lost everything you moved into that weight class to do. Gone.
Exactly.
It makes zero sense. And people are like, well, I paid tickets. Did you buy them on DustinPoirier.com?
Right.
Where'd you buy them? You bought them at like a Ticketmaster, whatever the Irish version is, or maybe UFC Direct. You bought those from the promoter. The promoter sold you that. That's their responsibility, and I know they got hit with terrible, terrible luck here. But Dustin Poirier did not stage this event. He was hired to participate and did everything he was asked to do. To blame him for not taking a fight is the height of stupidity.
Yeah, around 4.5 years ago, Nate Marquardt pulled out or was forced out of his fight against Rick Story. In comes Charlie Brenneman. And while Rick Story did have a big win over a year ago now, which is amazing, he hasn't fought since over Gunnar Nelson. He never really quite recovered from that loss, in my opinion, to Charlie Brenneman. He took a fight on short notice against a completely different fighter.
And who's in Dustin Poirier? He was sort of a late replacement again. Who was he? Like a long time ago. When he came in the UFC, essentially.
Oh yeah, it was Josh Grisby.
Yes, and I mean it's. There you go. I mean, he sort of derailed that guy's career.
Yeah, he was supposed to fight for the belt.
Absolutely.
And people bring up Cowboy Cerrone. Okay, Cowboy Cerrone, he'll be the gun draw and he'll draw with you, and he keeps winning. That's why people love him, and I get it. But to be like, this is a model you can follow. No, Cowboy can do that because Cowboy is special. Not everyone is Cowboy Cerrone. And for Dustin Poirier to think like, gee, let me think about my future, as if this is controversial, is so ludicrous. Selfish fans out there being like, well, I paid money. Good. Taking it with the people who sold you the ticket.
It's so unfortunate to watch Dustin Poirier's demeanor in interviews that came out yesterday explaining this situation, also having to explain himself for not taking this fight. Like he has anything to be ashamed of. It's this.
He isn't battle tested.
Yeah.
This isn't some guy with 3 fights.
He had signed up
100%.
to fight in a cage on Saturday night. His opponent fell out. I mean, for anyone to blame him for saying no or his team for saying no is, I get it. You pay tickets. I certainly understand where the fans are coming from, especially because you're not getting that co-main event, which was a great fight.
And not only signed up to fight, but let's also be clear, he signed up to fight in the other guy's backyard, basically. So this is, and he's a higher ranked and a more highly regarded fighter. I know Joseph Duffy's a guy on the rise, and there was a reason why Duffy got him. There was a reason why they're pushing Duffy and why Duffy got the home game, essentially. But Poirier stepped up to, he didn't have to do that, especially after the performance he put on against McGregor. You know that there's going to be there would have been some catcalls about what McGregor did to him. So he was going to go out there into the belly of the beast and fight against a guy who is supposed to be the next Irish, next big thing out of Ireland, and it didn't happen. So, but it's not nothing to hold against him.
There's a history of this. Ilir Latifi stepped up on almost the exact same, notice to fight Gegard Mousasi in Sweden. So I think fans see that and like, well, if Mousasi took that fight, why didn't Dustin? But it's not.
Latifi would have been going up though. Latifi was seizing an opportunity to.
Oh, I'm saying Mousasi took a huge risk taking that fight,
right,
and so Mousasi's Poirier is in the Mousasi spot here.
Look, if you want to praise a guy for doing that kind of thing because it's you like it, okay, fine. But like the idea that this is like that every fighter should just throw caution to the wind and not think about their career and how to advance themselves, I mean.
It actually raises more eyebrows if he would have taken the fight, as opposed to like, oh, this is a guy who's actually
and
taking
all
his
respect
career
to Lil
seriously.
Latifi, he's had a big turnaround, but at the same time there, I don't know, man, Norman Park can fight a little bit. I don't know how much I like, and plus he's Northern Irish, so he's been like cheered on. Like I'm plus Dustin Poirier. I'm like, dude, save it for a guy. If you're gonna lose to someone, make sure it's a main event against a guy like Joe Duffy, man. Like,
So, I mean, I don't. Your reaction almost tells me that you're surprised by this or something. And this is something that's been going on.
A little bit.
Even look at the famous one with John Jones when Henderson falls out and they try to give him Sonnen, a very beatable opponent for him, but he didn't take the fight because he wasn't prepared for that. And he had a championship and he had a lot of things at stake and he didn't do it. And that was his right to not do it. But he got beat up. He got beat up in the court of public opinion and even by the UFC itself. At least the UFC isn't jumping in and saying, and sort of hanging Poirier out to dry. At least as far as I've seen.
Poirier actually said in an interview that Dana White specifically said to him, feel absolutely zero pressure to take this fight. And he said he appreciated that a lot.
well, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dustin Poirier really did come across like a professional athlete. I saw the interview when they were talking to him, and he made all the points we're making. That basically, I'm contracted to fight this guy. I'm not contracted to just, willy-nilly and scramble at the end to do whatever to save a card. I just thought he came across. He was obviously sort of heartbroken, I think, about what was going on, going out and training and all that. But I know he was on your show not all that long ago, and he had talked about training changing his whole training methods. Doing all this stuff. I really believe he's in a process of reinvention. He really believes it. And you can understand 100% that he's not going to, in a new weight class, his mind feeling like he's got things turned around. He's not going to put all that at stake on a whim like this over 48 hours before, he's going to make the next step in his career. So to me, I have no problem with it, and it makes complete sense. I would actually be questioning him more so if he took that fight.
Yeah, and we should give credit where it is due. We're referencing these interviews. One was on MMA Junkie, the other on MMA Latest News, I believe.
Go ahead. Also of praise on that note.
Yeah.
UFC taking this guy.
Well, that was actually my next
Okay, you
point.
go ahead then, because I just think that's tremendous. It sucks. Like, it's completely not in their interest at all. I know we talked about the Vitor Belfort stuff and them turning a corner. This is not related in the same sense of it being a performance-enhancing drug issue, but nevertheless, hearing about a problem and saying whatever the medical staff says, we're going to do. That to me was totally the right way to handle it. It sucks for them that they did it, but to me, this is how you, I don't know if build back credibility is the word. I mean, they've got some credibility. They've knocked it down a little bit. I don't view it in the larger picture in that sense, but just to me, I don't like that this happened. But if he really is injured, fighting with a concussion 7 days later is a disastrous idea. I totally tip my hat to them for making the tough right call.
Susceptible. I mean, obviously, like a 7 day, you're so susceptible to another one. When you have them that quick. And I mean, you see guys like T.J. Grant. We always were, what happened to T.J. Grant? Well, his concussion hasn't come back. Chris Holdsworth. I mean, you got to look at these guys who just sort of disappear and back into the this landscape, and you're like, what happens? So you hear a guy with a concussion, you're obviously like, I'm glad to see that the UFC basically was like, hey, we're not going to let you fight, even if you wanted to or whatever it is. They need to take those measures.
I will play devil's advocate just a little bit on this and say that it's a lot easier to make this decision when you've already sold out the arena and this is not a pay-per-view that people are going to be ordering on Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening. It's a little bit easier. Not to say that the UFC didn't do something brave and heroic or whatever you want to call it, but this was not. This was not something happening where Aldo falls out of a pay-per-view and they've got to sort of mess around. So, but still, let's give him credit for it. But there is that little caveat there.
It is a 100% a fair point. My big takeaway after digesting the news was credit to his team, Duffy's team, for alerting the UFC. It shows that they really care about his well-being. I mean, we weren't there. We don't know how bad the blow to the head was, but I think there are some people out there that just wouldn't say anything, and that's very scary in this day and age. And credit to the UFC, as you said.
You saw fighters on Twitter, Ramsey Nijim, being like, I had a concussion the whole time on The Ultimate Fighter. Like,
there's nothing.
That is not evidence of good decision making. This is evidence of terrible decision making, like really, really career jeopardizing bad. The fact that he went the opposite direction shows why Duffy's in the position that he's in.
And for those that don't understand, in countries like Ireland and pretty much all throughout Europe, the UFC acts as the athletic commission. There is no athletic commission in place, so it's their call to put this in motion and then to make the final call to pull him. There's no Nevada Athletic Commission, etc. And so pay-per-view, they will very rarely be in this position for a pay-per-view fight. But I get what you're saying 100%. Yesterday, before this news came out, they announced that at UFC 195, Stipe Miocic, who was supposed to fight in the co-main event and pulled out due to a back injury, is fighting Andrei Arlovski January 2nd, and Ben Rothwell, who actually
That guy's face smudged on the glass.
yeah, who actually still flew out to Dublin to be with the fans and all that. He loves doing that sort of thing. We saw him at International Fight Week. Has no opponent, and he was the guy who was ready to fight. He was pretty vocal about this online. Does he have a gripe here?
Yeah, ever since his last victory, I was saying, like, it's sort of crazy that he's turned it around. He's won 3 in a row, and he's entering that space of title contention. You sort of think, well, he's got one more hurdle. Well, Stipe is going to be that guy, right? Like, that would be a type of guy. If he beats him, he really has a legit shot to get to fight for the title. So all of a sudden, he's the odd man out, and that whole division has had such a strange top, because the guys, Andrei Arlovski is sort of just keeps going. So he's in that space. Miocic is up there. So you put these guys, you could put any of them against each other. There's always going to be kind of an odd man out, I feel like. And he's got a gripe, because I was sort of looking down afterwards, like, who could he possibly face at this point? And they're all below him. If you're looking at the rankings, if you hold them as anything, pretty much everybody else would be below him at this point. So I don't know what he does at this. Does he take a fight with a guy like, Barnett, if Barnett will fight, Frank Mir, I don't know, maybe Roy Nelson, somebody like that, but they're all sort of below him in the ranks. I know he wanted to take the guy who was going to get him to that hurdle. So
the timing is certainly strange.
Yeah, the timing is bad.
To announce this while he's in Dublin for a show.
I guess they figured he could drown his sorrows over there a little bit.
Yeah, well, but all the potential opponents for Rothwell are below him, but the two guys who are now going to fight are both above him. And so I have no problem with the UFC putting together the best heavyweight fight it can put together.
You could make a case that that's the fight that would make the most sense, at this point.
Yeah.
That's the issue. What happens is there's 2 fights, or there's a fight lined up, X versus Y, and Y gets injured, okay? And then Y gives a timeline for his return. It's however many months ahead.
Right.
They then look at who else is available at that time. X still thinks, well, we'll just move our fight to that time. But what the UFC, I won't say often does, but has done in the past is say, well, let's rethink these permutations. Is there actually a better upgrade that I can make at that time? Rothwell versus Miocic is an awesome fight. I wouldn't complain about it at all. Miocic versus Arlovski, that's a title eliminator right there. I'm not sure the one with Rothwell is necessarily, although it could be too, but there's just a little bit more grandeur to that one. And I think they're like, you know what? We already lost this friggin' main event. I know the announcement came a little before that, but just trying to make the biggest fights possible. It's not that hard to argue that Arlovski Miocic is bigger than Rothwell Miocic, unfortunately.
I wanted to hear the evil laugh again, though. I got to be honest with you.
But that being said, I would have also taken Rothwell versus Arlovski,
of course,
too,
yes,
because that would have been awesome as well. So in fairness to Ben Rothwell, I think that would have been a cool fight.
He said that he doesn't wish injury upon anyone, but if Alistair Overeem just so happens to pull out of the JDS fight, that's the fight that he really wants. So we'll see if he gets his wish.
Which would be a good
there.
one.
By the way, one last thing on Duffy Poirier. Is that the fight that you guys want to see them rebook? Or should we go in a different
and
direction?
again, some fights are always worth rebooking.
Yeah.
The Irish thing, the metaphorical Irish monkey on Poirier's back, I think he really wants to address that. I think the two match up excellently. And Duffy, with Duffy, when you watch him fight, for me, it's like, I think that there's magic there, but I don't know for sure. A guy like Poirier will give you a very clear test about whether or not there
actually is. That's funny, we were saying the same thing about McGregor, essentially, when he was going against Poirier. Yeah. But it's more so on this one, because I feel like we haven't seen that much of Duffy. We've seen him in 2 UFC fights. So yeah, I thought it was sort of the perfect fight for both guys at the time, and stylistically I really liked it as well. So
we have to see, how serious that concussion is. But if he's ready to go in December, wouldn't it be great from a story perspective to stick him on one of those 3 cards in Las Vegas? There'll be so many Irish fans there. You've had enough of that? You roll your eyes.
I'm okay with that.
Oh, okay. You were kind of rolling your eyes. All right.
Okay.
Fair enough.
they need to put some talent on those cards anyway.
Yeah, I think they're kind of full, but they could use one more little Irish.
Sage and Page and Duffy.
Yeah, for anyone complaining that they're not getting their money's worth on Fight Pass this Saturday, you're getting Sage Northcutt again on December 10th. That's worth the $9.99 for 3 months, at least in my opinion. Okay, right before the Rothwell, the non-Rothwell announcement, the Miocic-Arlovski announcement, this big story came out regarding an Irish Reebok T-shirt, in which the folks over at Reebok really pissed off a lot of Irishmen, most notably head coach over at SBG Ireland, John Kavanagh. They put out a T-shirt with the UFC Ireland and the map of the Republic of Ireland, if I'm getting this correct.
Correct.
And with the,
but not Ireland,
yes,
the island.
but it did say Ireland on it only.
Right.
And then they had some sort of tagline, which is the exact wording is escaping me, but it's like show your territorial allegiances or something like that, or show which side you're on, so to speak. This caused a big outrage. Kavanaugh was at the front of it, put it very nicely why he was bothered by this. Of course, long history, and I want to say first and foremost before we weigh in on this, we're 3 Americans and 1 Canadian here. I don't think any of us is in the real position to weigh in on the history there between Northern Ireland. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn.
I'm half Irish American.
Well, there you go. So if you want to wax
that
poetic,
doesn't count.
if you want to wax poetic, feel free. I don't feel comfortable, but I will side with John Kavanagh, who dates a woman from Belfast and was incredibly offended by this. That being said, again, it's another misstep by Reebok, to say the least.
I would just say that I don't think, there's politics behind the outrage here, and I would be surprised if there's any politics behind how Reebok designed this shirt. I think it's just another example, just like Giblert, Melendez, of just trying to do things without really taking the extra step to make them right. They said it was a design flaw. Well, you look at the thing, and if you've designed something that doesn't include the entire island, look at it and figure out what you're trying to do, and just take the extra. How long? 2 minutes? Does it take 2 minutes to proofread all the names of the fighters? Or, maybe an hour to proofread all those names, make sure the names are right. This is just another example of Reebok, spending all this money on this big contract with the UFC, and then taking the small details and pretending that they don't even exist. And if this is the way that they're going to conduct themselves in this, I'm just not. I just have very little hope for how they're going to do this going forward. It's just stupidity.
It all seems like improv to me. Like everything is just so rushed and thrown together. Everything that they've done, impromptu. Everything is just like impromptu. That's what I'm saying. So everything is just sort of thrown together. Going back to, we were both at the unveiling in New York City, and they basically had the misspelling on the word, whatever it was. Like they had some flexibility. Yes, and you're like, just something like that. Just off the bat, you're like, wow, they couldn't take the time to see that, And then all of the kind of coming out of that with all the misspellings, all the first name usage of guys that like Cub Swanson and guys like that were being referred to, and all of those things. It started off on such a bad foot that now these things seem extra egregious, because you're like, wow, here's something that it's pretty black and white. You're over there and you're trying to sell something. It just seems like you're trying to incorporate the most spirit into the thing as you can, but you're not doing the most basic thing, which is just to make sure that you're doing it correctly, make sure that you're labeling it correctly, make sure that you're being inclusive, not exclusive like that. Because honestly, that sort of mistake, it's sort of hard to believe when they're over there. You know what I mean? And they're promoting Ireland like that. It's sort of hard to believe that they can't get on the same page on something like that.
That was, for me, it was like, could you show that T-shirt to an Irish person and they'd be like, yep, nailed it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Before it went to production,
Sure.
They would be like, what are you doing, moron? You can't, this is terrible. You can't do this. So there's one issue about product curation, about how long they're going to take to bring things to market, what kind of due diligence they're going to do. And, would that occur to most Americans who aren't familiar with some of the deeper cultural and identity issues involved in Irish heritage? No, maybe not. But again, if you asked, I think, any person from Dublin, they'd be like, well, or Belfast, the two, this is problematic. So one is just the curation thing, but I really feel like this whole thing about the nationalism push needs to be rethought. Look, nationalism means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and a lot of people want to promote it in a very forward way, and a lot of people don't want to promote it in a very forward way. And the only time I think it really works is in 2 conditions. One, when a person is a said representative in an official capacity of their country. So, for example, Jordan Burroughs is on the U.S. Olympic team competing in an international competition like the Olympics. That, to me, counts. The other one is then when it just kind of one guy galvanizes people behind him, like Conor McGregor. To me, to make Irish nationalism part of his marketing brand makes absolute sense. But for a lot of people, it really, really doesn't. And when the more you engage in nationalism and the more you engage in cultural identity, it sounds good, but it should only really be used when it makes sense. To just force every single fighter kid to be about to be about that, which, by the way, is still kind of complicated because I don't think the guys from England wear the St. George Cross. Okay, why not? Why are people from some parts wearing the Union Jack? That makes no sense to me. So there's all kinds of like big problems there. You know, if you're from the Basque region of Spain, you got to wear a Spanish kit. That's problematic as hell, if you ask me. So there's all kinds of things, you know, and the Chris Weidman shoes, like, look, if you like that kind of stuff, that's cool, man. I know it was on your show, and I hope Chris Weidman gets paid. I really and truly do. And I think the guys at Reebok they're desperately trying. But if you know, and people think I'm an old fuddy-duddy for this, I am not. If you know anything about the United States flag, there is something called the flag code. It is complete and total. Let me be clear about this. Desecration to put that flag on a pair of tennis shoes. It is total desecration. And they go ahead and do it. It makes no sense to me. If you want to do it when it makes sense, because then it has such a tremendous impact. But to make nationalism, it's overkill, man.
I mean, you're calling into question the philosophy behind this whole design. I'm going to focus really purely on quality control. And when I see this ridiculous Irish shirt that doesn't include a part of the island, that is Ireland, and when I see all these kits with misspelled names, and when I see at the press conference a name misspelled or word misspelled up on the stage, the first thing I think of is, when are we going to have the first wardrobe malfunction because somebody's wearing a pair of Reebok shorts and they split down the middle, or the gloves just like whatever part of the wardrobe that these fighters, this kit, if they can't take enough time to get these simple things right, how do we trust that they're taking enough time to get the real stuff right?
There was a female fighter that suffered from a wardrobe malfunction.
The one who fought Jessamine Duke.
Yeah,
I forget her name.
Yeah, I didn't want to put her on blast, but I mean, there were pictures all over the place that were not very favorable.
But the functionality of the gear, I think, is something that I haven't heard of too many complaints about.
No, actually, I think that's the
Fighters
one.
seem to like the
yeah,
functionality
that's the
of the
one
gear.
like unanimous. Oh, they're like, okay, I'm okay with this.
I just feel
lot
like
of people-
I feel like if you're gonna promote someone, promote something that they want to promote.
Yeah.
Like who is this person? Maybe nationalism. I'm just putting this out there. I don't know. I'm just making an example. Maybe nationalism is not that necessarily a big a deal to Jacare. It may in fact be. I'm just making it like. There's got to be some guy out there being like, I mean, okay, I'm from this place, but I don't really. And guys all walking out wearing the flag, like. It's not that I'm against it. I just want that person to say, I want to carry this flag.
Sure.
This is part of who I am. Not because here you're in the co-main event, carry this flag. It
don't
just makes no
feel
sense
like
to
it's
me.
that planned out. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
what it really seems to me is that they're like, hey, we got this crunch. We need to get these kits together, guys. Where are we at on that? Let's just get them out. You know, put the colors. Let's get the names on them. You know what I'm saying? That's how it feels. It really is a strange association now. I feel like things really couldn't go much worse for this whole Reebok and UFC thing than they have, honestly. Like, the whole association, I feel like now Reebok, especially with MMA hardcore fans, it just seems like a joke now. Like, everything that kind of happens, and it's crazy. I would have never anticipated when they were announcing Reebok and all that we'd be talking about all this stuff, all these problems that they've had, all these errors, you know, all these missteps. I mean, it's just crazy to me that it's kind of going on, because from the UFC's angle, they were partnering up with the most legitimate thing they could do. This is one of the biggest things they've ever done. They're going to partner with, and to have all these things happen, it starts to get a little bit embarrassing for everybody involved, really.
And to address some of the things that Luke brought up, that's something for a deeper discussion, a philosophical discussion of what you want to do, how you want to represent your gear. But to address the issues that I'm bringing up, or even that Chuck just did, we're talking like an hour. We're talking like an hour, 2 hours to proofread stuff. We're not talking philosophically. We're talking about the smallest details that take an hour, 2 hours. Maybe it takes a whole day. Maybe instead of unveiling things on a Tuesday, you unveil on a Wednesday and you get it right.
I would disagree with that a little bit. I mean, I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, editing, fact checking, but to your point, like okay, you're going to Ireland with Joe Duffy. Slow down. Maybe you just don't have T-shirts this time. Take your time to do it right. If that means not just Tuesday to Wednesday, but January to August, I'm okay with that, because imagine if they had taken their time and they had come out with a badass shirt for, I don't know, let's say Conor fights at UFC 200 or something, and that's the Reebok shirt they unveiled. They had an unveiling, and you were like, you know what? That's all right. I mean, this whole episode goes away. Take your time.
It's unbelievable that Reebok, at least twice I know of, has had to go on their Twitter accounts and basically apologize for things. And that's what I'm saying. Like, that association is just on such a bad foot that you hope it improves over time. You hope that they start to kind of make it more individual and fix some of these things. But man, it's pretty ugly now.
They've really put themselves behind the 8 ball because, like, even the last couple of days, I was looking at the comments, and you know, YouTube comments. They're a special bunch over there.
Oh, yes.
But I was looking at the comments just out of curiosity for the show on Monday when we had Wyman on and they unveiled his stuff. And man, it's just like unanimous towards Reebok in a negative light. I mean, like the fans just associate them with, you know,
they're trying, man.
It's crazy.
They're trying, but it's like they're going to have to do a lot of good to make up for what has it been? It's been less than a year. It's been 10 months. Since that press conference, December of last year is when
I kind of feel like this is my point, that they need to be quiet for a while and like dig in, get some focus groups to look at it, hire who you got to hire, and come out and wow the S out of everybody. Like whatever it takes to do that, and then that can, I feel like, restart the process a little bit. You know,
100%.
Did you want to say something?
I was just going to say that, you know, quality control. I mean, you know, it doesn't surprise me that the comments on YouTube were negative. I mean, that's a, you know, I mean, as your buddy CM Punk said on your show the other day, he referred to a cesspool of humanity, which I thought was one of the more brilliant, you know, wordplay that I've heard. But, you know, years ago, I was hired by Disney Publishing to help launch a magazine. We spent an entire year where we didn't put out one word. All we did was go through focus groups and all kinds of testing just to see whether every single little detail of what we were doing worked, down to the font we were using, down to the paper stock we're using, down to every single detail. And when we finally put out a magazine, it was good. Why not do that? Why not do that?
Going today,
It got canned.
That's a small detail.
you don't want to do the Axl Rose Chinese democracy bit, where you wait so long that it's like, Jesus, we waited for this, Axl, you idiot.
Yeah.
But you definitely, you know, you want to take some time to come out and just like edit it, make it good. I really believe that.
All right, since you brought him up, let's talk about CM Punk. I know that we were divided on this show and all over the MMA blogosphere, if you will, about the UFC's announcement, which also happened around 10 months ago. It was UFC 181, December 6th, I believe, was when they brought him out on pay-per-view and announced that he had signed with the UFC and would fight in the future. But he has received a lot of criticism as of late, as has the UFC, for not fighting yet. And I find this criticism, and this is not because, you know, I have a relationship with him or anything, and I want to really weigh on you guys here, but I just want to say I find this criticism to be suspect, to say the least, because no one came out and said that he would be fighting in the fourth quarter of 2015 or October, November. Like this idea that, you know, he's dragging this on for PR reasons, or that he never had any intention of fighting, to me seems very far-fetched. And when you consider the fact that he suffered an injury, I mean, why doesn't he get to play by the same rules as everyone else? How do you guys feel about the story? Do you feel like, okay, just go away until you're ready to fight? I don't want to hear from you. I don't want to see you at Q&As. I don't want to hear anyone talking about you until you're ready to fight. You should have fought by now. Where do you guys stand on this? Because I feel like he's receiving a lot of criticism as of late.
One mistake that maybe they could have avoided was announcing it then. What they should have done was to let him sort of come along maybe 6 months before they ever announced him going to sign with the UFC. Because at the time, I remember we were like, wow, we sort of knew something like this might happen, but we knew that he didn't really have much training. We knew he did some jiu-jitsu, you know, he'd had some odd training here and there in Los Angeles, but we were like, we didn't really know to what extent, and we sort of suspected he was going to need some time. And from the very beginnings, even back then going into January and February, Duke Rufus, when he decided he was going to go there, was basically like, I'm going to need probably a good year with this guy. So it was very optimistic to even think he'd be fighting this year at all. Like, in my mind, this has been the whole time. So I'm a little bit surprised. Maybe people are just like, wow, what happened? What's going on with that guy? And it's just starting to occur to them. Like, and they hear about the injury and it just kind of riles up some kind of feeling about him. But the bottom line is, I really didn't anticipate him fighting. And I'm a little surprised, I guess, at that criticism, because you knew he was a raw product, was being sculpted every day as a kind of late bloomer, I guess, what we want to call him, a guy who was getting into the game so late in life. It's not going to be that easy. And I think he, having visited him in Milwaukee in May or June, basically, you know, you could see that it's tough. He was going through it. He's taking it very seriously, but it's a very tough process. and he was pretty realistic about where he was not good and where he needed to improve, and his coaches were pretty realistic with him. So, I can see where he's getting frustrated. He's starting to ignore those people, but at the same time, it's like, man, you knew it was going to be at least a year. I think they probably should have waited until this summer to announce that he even signed.
But there's two different goals here. There's the UFC's goal, which was to generate some buzz or some publicity and play off of that. And then, of course, there's CM Punk's expectation that he wanted to test himself. And he's going about it the way, we just talked about Reebok not dotting the I's and crossing the T's and not taking care of all the details. Well, Punk is doing the thing that he's supposed to do. He's said I'm going to fight in the octagon, but he's not just jumping in there half-assed. He's going to go into Duke Rufus's gym and prepare until he's ready. Good for him. That's what he should do. I think even he said on your show that he sort of wishes that the UFC hadn't jumped out and said something ahead of time. But looking at it from their perspective, well, they've got this hot commodity, this guy that already has a huge name for himself from his pro wrestling days. Of course they're going to let people know about it ahead of time. I don't see why there's any issue here at all. The guy's training, he gets injured, he'll fight at some point when he's healed.
If these questions didn't come up on Twitter, I wouldn't even know they existed, to be totally honest.
In terms of what?
It's the ultimate fighting championship. He could train for 40 years and never be ready. Like a year is nothing. It takes most people about 2 years just to get a blue belt. And striking might be as hard as jiu-jitsu, if not harder. And then wrestling might be impossible to learn from some people. A year? A year is, the buzzing of flies. Like it's such a ridiculous timeline. It sounds like, I gotta wait a full year. I mean, you could have this guy train for the next 5 years and do nothing else. And by the way, he's old and beat up, relative to, a 22-year-old or a 19-year-old Sage Northcutt or something like that, right? Well, I mean, he's, that kid is I hate him and love him at the same time, Mostly love him though. But you get my point. Like that kid is just, a superhuman, and this is, Punk is the part of the man's life where they're losing like 1% of their muscle mass every year from testosterone depletion, natural testosterone depletion. So like for me, like this idea that he ever was going to be ready in a year or ever was like it's fantasy. This is a vanity project. Mm-hmm. Let's just be clear about what that is. You could put up a map and you could take a kid and spin him in a circle, like pin the tail on the donkey, blindfold him and tell him to go, and he could pin that thing on any city in a country, and you could find someone in some gym that could beat the brakes off CM Punk. It's just a reality. He is so not prepared for this level. You could not do that with Chris Weidman. You could not do that with Anderson Silva, or probably not with Anderson Silva. I mean, this was like LA or New York or something. You get the idea. My only point being is like he has undertaken a task where they're grading on a curve, and I get all that. But even then, that curve is huge. It is huge. So like the fact that he got injured to me seems very understandable. The fact that he's like, what does ready even mean? Like how do you even define what ready is? You've never had any fights. How do you even know, So like you can do well in the gym. That doesn't mean you're ready in the ring. So for me, it's like if he's not ready for another year or two, I would be like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with your point, and to a degree his. I mean, I think they kind of botched the announcement in a sense because, like, first of all, to put it out on pay-per-view, if we're going to talk about just maximizing this whole thing, and I get what you're saying as well, but to put it out on pay-per-view where you essentially have the smallest audience possible that you're dealing with, right? Because if you're on Fox, that's a couple million at least. If you're on FS1, it's usually around 1 million. On pay-per-view these days, and off the top of my head, I don't remember what 181 did, but I know it wasn't more than 1 million. So you're dealing with a very small audience to get this out there. Plus, there was a lot going on in that card. Like, why cloud the message? So they did it on pay-per-view, which I wasn't a huge fan of. And then, he had to answer all these questions. Where are you going to train? I don't know. What weight class are you going to train? I don't know. Who are you training with? I don't know. It's like that kind of felt uncomfortable. They should have had him, if they were going to sign him and felt comfortable that this was going to be a secret, go sign him and put him somewhere. Let him go to Rufus. Let him do his thing, but just not do any interviews or anything like that.
Everyone there signs an NDA.
Yeah, and then 3 months before, UFC 205, guess what? Right here is this guy, CM Punk is ours, and he's going to fight so-and-so. And then that buzz, remember, back in December, there was buzz. Like the story or not, there was a lot of talk on non-MMA shows about this. That would have kept going. And I feel like they lost that momentum, and now people are kind of like, well, is this ever going to happen? Even though I think that's unfair to a degree.
Let me ask you this, since you're close to the story. Do you think the Gina Carano thing plays into it at all?
In terms of what?
She's like, I'm coming back. I might come back. I'm coming. Oh, I'm not coming back at all.
So you feel like the fans and media have lost patience?
Just
with a story
that
like this?
they don't believe him. That because we've seen this before with a high-profile figure. You know, CM Punk is not poor.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's getting paid to compete, but he's not poor. He doesn't really. Does he need the UFC?
I think this one's different because he signed a contract with the UFC. He's a UFC contracted fighter. Gina never did that.
That's true.
And the timing of her "I'm coming back" announcement
promote,
coincided very much with a movie. So I think his different. I truly, genuinely believe that he has every intention of doing this. I just think that they did him no favors by announcing, and it was their call, as he said, by announcing it before he had ever really gotten his feet wet, And I think in hindsight, they probably should have waited until he was ready. If that would have been 2 years or a year and a half, just wait a few months before that date so that people can get excited and stay excited for the fight.
Now, whether they botched it or not, I mean, certainly is a judgment call. I do think that the UFC likes to be in control of the narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, it has its own announcing teams and production teams. It really likes to be in control. How long would it have been that CM Punk is training with Rufus in that gym before somebody tweets out, "Hey, I saw CM Punk training in that gym"? It wouldn't have taken very long for that to come out.
No, but he could say, "I have an intention. I'm a retired wrestler who wants to become a fighter."
Or just lie. I have no intention of fighting whatsoever.
I'm just chilling.
6 months later, I'm here to fight.
Right.
Everyone will be like, "Oh, you got me." It'll be fine. No one would
Of
care.
course, there would have been talk, but that all would have played into the buzz, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, what's he doing? He's training
They
more.
could have done better, I guess. Yeah, sure.
All right, so let's move along to another story that came out yesterday, and this one's a little bit out there, but I think very interesting as well. The New Jersey Athletic Commission came out and said that they are going to experiment with this pretty fascinating thing on October 31st at a CFFC show, in which they're going to have a group of judges judge fights in soundproof rooms. So they'll have no access to commentary or even crowd noise, but these judges won't have any effect on the actual fights. There will be judges cage side doing their usual thing, but they want to see, essentially, Nick Lembo and company want to see if the scorecards given by the judges cage side will coincide and be on par with the judges in the soundproof rooms. Essentially, they want to see how much crowd noise and, well, they don't really get to listen to the commentary, but the ambiance affects the judges cage side. Do you guys like this idea? Do you not like this idea, Jeff? I know this is something you feel strongly about.
Well,
Let's hear your thoughts.
I mean, I don't know how strongly, but
you feel strongly.
I like it. I like it. I like. How many times have we been on this show and we've talked about how bad judging is, and we've talked about some judges don't follow the criteria they should, and we've had all kinds of complaints about it, and I don't know if this is a solution, but I like that they're trying something a little different. And also, personally, there are times when if I'm not covering a fight and I might have it on the DVR, or even if it's on live, oftentimes I'll just turn the sound down and watch it because I get a better sense of what's going on without hearing. In my case, I'm hearing also the announcers, and that changes your opinion about a fight in a big way. But even just the crowd noise, being in a if you were judging that Conor McGregor fight in Dublin, I mean, I know he didn't go to a decision, but the crowd noise was crazy. And anytime and this goes on for not just for UFC fights, this goes on for any sporting event. You watch a guy throwing a punch, and if that's the crowd favorite, the crowd goes nuts, and the other guy lands a punch and it's silence. So it's nice to try something a little different just to see if it has an effect. I mean, there are a lot of variables here. The judges who are in that soundproof room may be not as competent as the judges who are cage side, or they may be more competent. So there's a lot of variables. It's not going to be an exact experiment, but I just like the fact that Lembo is doing something to at least try to address the issue of bad judging.
A lot of it is archaic, the way that it was designed to begin with. So I feel like most people sort of agree, there has to be some, maybe we can come up with some alternatives. So you like to see them experimenting just to see, because honestly, what the people at home are getting is a collective experience. They're watching it collectively, and if you're on social media, whatever, you're collectively weighing in on this. The judges are not really doing that, especially from 3 different stations on that cage, so they're getting 3 different perspectives. They're all very personal perspectives. That's the way it was designed. They were even reluctant at first to even have monitors because they didn't want to share in that collective experience. It only had to kind of be brought up that was the best way to do it because you're going to have your angles taken away from a cage, which we all know. We've all seen the obstructions in the cage and everything if you're sitting close. So it's been a slow evolution. So you like to see that they are thinking in those ways, because you're right, these are human beings that can be affected. If there's a big exchange, a guy who's not being rooted for within the crowd, gets off two or three punch combo, and then but on the counter, on the breakaway, the guy lands and everybody cheers. Well, that might have seemed like to that guy, to his registration of what just happened, that he got the better of that exchange, which is really not the case. So I like the idea of experimenting. I don't know how it'll go. Like, we'll see kind of how it goes. I don't even know how you'd go, like how they'll even judge how they did. Like, is it going to be more like you look at how people judge the fight, like how the media judge the fight? I don't know. But ultimately, you like the idea because I feel like that's still the gray area in this sport that is the most criticized, perhaps, of everything, is the judging. So you like to see them try to do anything out of the box just to sort of solve that.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to that. This is the commission that had hired Ricardo Almeida. This is the commission that had reversed controversial boxing decisions and removed commissioners, or judges anyway, for poor performance. This is the commission that used the judgment of Jeff Blatnick. This idea that, like, and I think California's trying some different things with weight cutting.
Yeah.
So I like seeing some of these commissions take initiatives. Just wanted to use this opportunity to take a dig at Nevada for doing nothing but sitting on their rear ends and taking people's careers away. So shout outs to them.
This is your chance to
Say his name.
Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz.
There you go.
He's like the boogeyman, right?
There we go.
The Babadook. Anyway, so that to me just should be noted. Like, you see which commissions are trying, which ones aren't. That's a note here. Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm just wondering if we could stick some referees in a soundproof room as well. Maybe that would be the.
Well, you actually bring up a great point.
This is what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
That's the only thing is, like, I love the spirit of the attempt, and I hope it yields something fruitful. I'm a little bit concerned, though, because to the point you said, I think you nailed it right away. The variables. Is it the crowd noise? Is it the position? Is it any number of different things you have to isolate for? Is it this level of MMA? Is it because amateur MMA doesn't look the same as mid-level pro versus UFC. So, like, you have to do these things all over. And then what if you come up with that there is a slight difference? Is that impetus to change the rules? I don't know. Like, again, I'm not against it in any way, shape, or form. I applaud it. But I am a little bit wait and see about what it all means.
Sure, and that's why it's being called an experiment, and that's why they're not given the final say for this particular card. I did speak to a veteran judge a couple days ago, off the record, but he said something that ties in here perfectly. He said that he sees very often at UFC shows in particular, judges are afraid to piss off the crowd. And, when it's time to give their scorecard, they look around.
Man, I love pissing off the crowd. You get me to be a judge.
But you
Are you kidding? I would judge on purpose to piss off the crowd.
Well, he actually said the same thing. He's like, I couldn't care less, and that's the attitude that you have to judge the fight and block everything out. Easier said than done when you're sitting, in an arena with 20,000 or so people. But it's a very good point, because there's a lot of pressure on these guys, and you kind of try to feel out the crowd. You think back to Boston, the Hal Pendred fight.
Yes.
You try to feel out the crowd.
That's the one that always comes to mind.
Who will they be in favor?
Who's back this weekend, by the way?
Who is back this weekend?
But this is a bit of a problem too, though, because on the one hand, you want to make sure that there is an unsullied process to produce a result. But if the result is bad, these people need to be held accountable. So that is, to me, what is a little bit, it's a very difficult task that Nick Limbo or any commissioner has, where you want to protect them while they make the decision, but if it's bad, I would like to hear them answer for it on occasion. And, what mechanism you want to use to do that, I don't know. But that they're constantly shielded from the public, to me, in all forms, I find a little problematic.
You know what I love now that I become this uber baseball fan again? they actually do this thing where, when there's controversial calls, the umpires, they're not made available to the press, but what is distributed to the media is essentially a Q&A with all the relevant questions where the umpires explain why they made certain calls. that's the least that can be done. I mean, it would be great if they have to sit there at a press conference and answer questions from the media, but that's the least that can be done.
I remember Keith Kaiser was always under fire. Like, what happens when these guys like Mazzagatti or somebody screws something up? Do they get talked to? And it was always so vague as to what actually happened. Was there any level of accountability of what happened? You could never get a straight answer on this stuff.
Why can't they field questions?
Well, because you also don't want them worrying about having to answer to the public. True. But I like that, what you're talking about, which is I'm going to, here is my rationale, and I'm going to state it. And it's going to stick, but at least you know what we're working with here. You should be able to either orally or written defend your decision, and I think that is at least some kind of compromise versus, being whipped with chains or not having to say anything ever at all.
Yeah, but final point. Once again, New Jersey doing a lot of good things. That commission, headed by Lembo and Larry Hazard, still at the forefront as much as they were, 15 or so years ago.
Which is pretty remarkable when you think about it.
Let's talk about Nick Newell before we go. He announced his retirement on Saturday after a win, an inspirational story. Anyone watching this show knows all about Nick Newell. A young guy, not even 30 years old yet. I'm wondering if you guys were surprised. I mean, he talks about injuries, but, we've seen guys take a year off or so. Are you surprised that he retired? And how do you remember Nick Newell? Was he just an inspirational story? Was he a guy who did, more than you thought he would in his MMA career? When I say the name Nick Newell, now that his career is over, at least for now, we know how these retirements go in combat sports. What comes to mind?
For me, it is, I think Nick Newell's athletic life, well, his whole life. Nick Newell's life is a series of courageous decisions, right? Not just I'm going to do MMA, but like on your show, for example, he said something I thought was really interesting. Like, everyone thinks that my congenital amputation is a big deal, and maybe to y'all it is a big deal. To me, it's not a big deal. That is a choice, though. Like, that's a choice he made to say, I'm not going to view this as anything other than just a condition of life, and then I will just go and do my life as anyone else would. These are difficult things for guys to do, and they're not automatic and they're not easy. Very different situations, but I've seen and experienced veterans who come back from war who are missing limbs. Again, it's a very different situation, but these are hard, and these are injuries they sustain later in life. But still, these are very difficult things for guys to get through. And I often found to me that this guy, well, what does he have? Does he have any advantages from this? Are you the dumbest person in the galaxy?
That started to swell up there for a while.
I was going to say this because I had to cover Nick Newell for one of my podcasts, the Monday Morning Analyst. I had never poured over tape of his fights. There are small circumstances where occasionally he'll catch someone with something, obviously a little hard to armbar on that left side, but there is so much he can't even gable grip, which is central to single legs, to double legs, to inside control, to everything, to the tie plumb, everything. He can't even do that. He has no defense on his left side, and he went out there and he fought on national TV. To me, the guy is a total inspiration. He's a hero, and the fact that he is nonchalant about it tells you what a badass he is.
Yeah, I would say that the story of Nick Newell, for me, changed the more I watched them fight. The beginning, when I first heard about this guy, I thought, this is a story about a guy with a disability and who's trying to reach for something great. And that was enough of a story, I thought, at first, to make it worth paying attention to the guy. But the more I watched him, the disability almost disappeared, and it just became a story of ability. Because you watch the guy fight, and there were times I would watch him, and I would sort of lose sight of the fact that he did not have a full left arm, that he would just use the body that he has, the body he was born with. I mean, he used that body to its utmost and did not, the idea that he had some kind of advantage or even the fact that he had a disadvantage, he just used what he had to its utmost. And so to me, the story of Nick Newell is a man using his ability, not his disability.
I just think he inspired a lot of awe, and not just with people like us who, you watch him, it's just his sport. He's in a sport where this really should have mattered more. It should have mattered. It's, like you were saying, there's so much limitation placed on him, but he got so good in all those other areas. But where the awe comes in is, I did a piece on him where I talked to Jim Abbott. He was the one-handed pitcher back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, I guess. Mm-hmm. But, he was in awe. He was in awe of Nick Newell because he was like, I was pitching. It was a matter of learning how to, function like that, but he treated it the same. It was a choice, like you said. It was nonchalant. He had to treat it that way to get to where he did. But he was watching Nick Newell in a fighting atmosphere, and his sense of awe. And when you see that, when you see a guy who's sort of like, I know Newell looked up to Jim Abbott. They've known each other kind of off and on through their life. To me, that's the inspiration. It's just like, wow, this guy took it to a level. He went into a cage fight. What should have been, like you say, is a disability, but he never treated it that way. He didn't get down on people who wanted to treat it that way. He would happily explain himself, and he always came across as an even-keeled professional the whole way. And like you might think that he walked away because he was never going to make it to the UFC or something like that, because that was a goal of his. But in the end, he was basically, like he said, it was more of a professional decision. He was dealing with back injuries. He was dealing with things like that. It was never about that for him. So to me, it was like, it's just a sense of awe, and just like, I think you nailed it. It's like his choice, his strength of mind.
Do you think there's anything to this idea, and I could be completely off base here, but I've noticed, especially as of late, a lot of MMA fighters are knowing when to say when. Remember Frankie Perez, not that long ago, at a very young age. Just Monday alone, we had Rick Hahn say goodbye after winning his first, significant belt. So Palele said goodbye. Of course, Nick Newell said goodbye. Is there a difference between the MMA fighter and the boxer? Does the MMA fighter, on the whole, on average, know when to say when better than the boxer? Because I feel like we're seeing a lot of retirements these days in MMA.
The boxers are typically the ones who make it to the highest level, have been in the game longer. You occasionally get your heavyweight Seth Mitchell, who was, I think a linebacker for Michigan State and then got into boxing late in life. But most of these kids have been in there, since they've been in their teens. So it's just, Jesus Christ, what else do you do?
Yeah.
A lot of these college wrestlers, okay, Chuck Liddell, it's always a joke, but Chuck Liddell does have an accounting degree.
Yes,
there is a lot of these boxers. I'm not saying they're not college graduates either. I don't want to make a blanket generalization, but to rise through the ranks, you got to go to the amateur system, and you have to start early and stay in long, and then you graduate to pros. And so I just think they've got a lot more on the line there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because we're entrenched in this world, so I can be completely off base here. But I think of Sam Stout. He probably stayed on one or two more fights, but he knew when to say when as well.
And he had
Mark
it in his
Hominick
mind,
as well.
obviously. That's what guy, like Sam Stout was one of those examples. You knew that he knew going in that last fight, if he went the same way because he hadn't been knocked out, suddenly it'd be 3 in a row, that the writing was on the wall. I feel like some guy, it was more reluctance back in the day. I don't know why, but I feel like guys, at least we're seeing it right now. We're seeing a lot of guys doing that.
Sorry, lastly, it's that UFC barrier too. A lot of guys, they say, well, if I can't make it in the UFC anymore, I don't want to fight anywhere else. I don't want to fight. Some guys will fight on smaller shows, obviously, but some guys don't. In boxing, I've seen this, and I don't want to say this guy's name, but I saw it. He had in my local area, he had a big peak for a while, and because he basically ran his own promotion company, and he stayed fighting for a year after, and the crowds got smaller and smaller and smaller, because that option is available to you there. A lot of guys, it's like UFC or bust. So maybe it's a good little form of quality control.
Yeah.
That
I
helps
keep saying it.
guys out.
There's really no graceful way out of this game. It's like most guys either go out like that where they hang around too long, they take too much damage in the end, where they can no longer, or they go too old, where the reflexes have slowed down, they're embarrassed a bunch of times at the end. It's very hard to get out. That's one of those things about the GSP conundrum that we're in right now, that you're like, well, gosh, you probably went out as the perfect way you actually can. If you come back, I feel like only bad things can happen,
And as you pointed out, this is a very recent phenomenon you're noticing, and I hope that it signals something a little bigger. I hope that fighters are starting to look for the exit door. That's really the bottom line. If you are in this game, you're either in it to win it, you're in it to keep rising, or you're in it thinking, well, I'm going to be in this fight game until I have something better to do, something that's going to carry me forward. And if you just retire from fighting and you've got nothing, then what good is it? But if you have something else to fall back on, whether you get a gym that you could train other fighters, or you get involved in broadcasting like some of the guys, this is what we can only hope that the fighters do, and they don't stick around too long.
And everybody's a little different. Like you mentioned Frankie Perez. Obviously that guy was like, I want to get a UFC win, and then that's all. I want to go and do what I do, which is he's got other things going on. Sam Stout, on the other hand, is one of those guys that you catch a little bit like, man, I wish I had. He wasn't making the most money, but he had cumulative fights, and he had a lot of fight of the nights, that sort of thing, and you could hear it in his voice, like, I really wish I'd have had the foresight when I was younger to pack away that money rather than sort of blowing it. And I feel like that also plays into it. These guys are like, he's a guy who forewent, his school, what was he going to be, a paramedic or something along those lines, so that he could fight. And it's like now he has to go back to that school. It's a lot goes into those decisions.
Another name, Brendan Schaub. Retired. His reasons perhaps a little different, but
he's making millions on the podcast. What does he need?
I'll put you on the spot. One last thing. completely on the spot here.
Oh.
Fighter to watch this weekend. There's Bellator, there's UFC.
Easy
What
call.
do you got?
Michael Venom Page. So
MVP.
simple. I don't even know who he's fighting. Couldn't tell you the guy's name if I tried. But I know
Some
Michael,
small name.
Yes, I know Michael Venom Page is fighting. I know that's always worth watching.
Jeff, anyone?
Boy, I don't even know. I
appreciate your
I have
honesty.
no idea. I really have no idea. I was thinking about that Bellator card, and because it's obviously up here in the Northeast, and I thought about going out there. And I'm not going to go. And I was trying to remember the names of the people who are going to be fighting. And the only guy I could think of on the card was Page. But
no Cahal Pendred for you?
I mean, really, I was interested in seeing the main event in Ireland. I guess that was it. That was the one.
Chuck?
I'm going with Patty. The T
There you
man.
go.
I'm going to go with him.
Patty.
Why not, man? He's got his first main event. Let's
Why
see what
not?
he does with it.
I'm excited for Darren Till.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's looked very good. It's unfortunate that he's not fighting in Brazil because I love his
Portuguese.
Exactly, his English-Portuguese accent is just amazing. Like you can, I mean, I think he's. They're gonna kill me for this. I think it's Liverpudlian, Scouse, I believe, is what you call the accent. I don't know. We had a whole discussion about this.
It's barely English. That's all I know.
What is he talking about? Anyway, it's a lot of fun listening to him speak Portuguese. He's fighting this weekend. I'll say this about the card. I know everyone's hating on it, and you have every right to.
Don't do it, Ariel.
There's some guys.
You're killing me.
Stevie Ray, Robert Whiteford had some good showings
Stevie Ray Vaughan,
in Scotland.
Stevie Ray Vaughan was great in Double Trouble.
Yeah.
Darren Till. I don't know.
Are we going to give Luca the platform to talk about his unsullied awe at the Star Wars trailer today?
Oh my God.
All right.
Fucking idiots.
That's when we say goodbye. All right, we are done for today. Good news, we're back next week. So this train keeps rolling along. I think we're about to approach our record for most consecutive shows in a row.
Sweet.
So very exciting. Thank you very much for watching once again. That is Luke, that is Jeff, that is Chuck. I am Ariel. We'll see you next week. Enjoy the fights.